Welcome to the Wednesday, December 4th Planning Board meeting for the Town of Raymond. The Planning Board will come to order. The board does have a quorum. And roll call, start anyway.
Bill Priest.
Greg Foster.
Robert O'Neill.
Bruce Sanford.
Steve Lene.
And joining us this evening is Jim Seymour, our town planner, and Chris Hansen, code enforcement. I got it right there. This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, you have the right to hear everything that is being said and to look at all of the exhibits that are present. Please notify the chairman if you are unable to hear or see. The board works from a published agenda, and we will be considering tonight's items in the following order. We're going to deal with the approval of the minutes from our October 23rd meeting and our October 30th meeting. Is our new planning board member, Ben? No? We scared him away already? Jeez, usually we get them here one day. Scare them away. Did you let him see a video or anything?
We scared Steve away, but he came back.
The workshop meeting items are going to be a proposed ordinance amendments for the proposed site plan review standards for Article 10B, the zoning map amendments, the growth management update, and revised parking standard amendments for the shoreline zoning provisions on the land use ordinance. Don't we also have the commercial district in there for the parking? Or are we all done with those?
It's both. It's
Okay.
both of them together, but there'll be two warrants.
Okay. And any planner communications? In each instance, the burden is upon the applicant to demonstrate compliance with the provisions of the applicable ordinance. The rest of my intro really deals with if there are any applications, which there are none. So we can start in with the approval of the minutes for October 23rd.
I'll move the minutes. I have no comments on
There was one typo. Last page, second paragraph, last sentence. Recommended notifications that may improve the likelihood of the project rather than may.
Jim, did you get a chance to read through those minutes?
I haven't.
Okay, there may be one comment, which I found, one sentence that's something that you said that didn't make, that I'm not exactly sure.
I could have said it.
You could have said it, but I don't think what you said actually got in there.
Where were you
But-
looking at?
Well, I can't find it. I had it a couple times, and then I lost it. So
Okay.
if there is a change, we can kind of do it. Any other changes? I gave Danielle some other changes. Was there a second to the, you moved it, right? You second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Done. October 30th?
Couple things. Second paragraph, the ME period before my name. And then, it's kind of, I'm not sure how you want to handle it. On the third page, where we're talking about the size of the parking spaces in around boat launches. It wasn't really clear if someone reads these minutes. What I was trying to say was that in boat launches, the parking spaces are twice as big. And for that reason, we should look at total square footage. It didn't come across to me as being clear that the reason that my reasoning behind that was that because the parking spaces were twice as big. So if we just count parking spaces, you're going to have the lots will be twice as large.
it. Oh, well, doubling
Yeah.
it in essence.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's where we talked about
We
just
talked
doing.
about putting the threshold of the area as well.
Right. So if you somewhere we could maybe put in there that basically it's because the parking spaces are twice as large around boat ramps.
Motion?
Move to accept the minutes as amended.
Second. Discussion, any other discussion? All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, done. One more call for Ben? Ben?
Yes,
Oh, you really?
I am.
Oh! Fantastic.
Last
Sorry.
time I checked.
Well, welcome. So you are applying
I
for,
am.
fantastic. Would you like to just give us a
I can
short?
briefly, sure.
That would be great.
My name is Benjamin Crowder.
I'm sorry, you have to go to the
The mic-
microphone,
You got it.
and that way your face makes it on the camera.
Oh, Lord. Are you sure your camera's up to that? My name is Ben Crowder. I've been a resident of Raymond now for approximately 27 years. Moved here with my family when I was 4 years old. Went to school in Raymond, grew up in Raymond, watched Raymond kind of grow and change as it went along. I went to Tulane University in New Orleans and the University of Maine School of Law in Portland, graduating in 2008. I've been practicing law since 2009 in January in South Portland, and then in Otisfield, and then most recently in North Windham, where I opened an office back in June of this year. I do still live in Raymond on the Sloan's Cove Road. I have a vested interest in the town and its development and progression, and I'm interested in applying my particular set of legal skills to trying to help the town carry on its business.
Sounds good. We could use the legal aspect. Are there any questions for Ben?
I've known Ben for 15 years, I guess.
So he's a friend of
Good man.
yours?
He's a good kid, and he's a better man.
Thank you, Bruce.
Must play baseball, huh?
Umpire. Oh, I did play baseball for several years. Played with Craig. Umpired baseball after that for a couple of years before I left to go away for college. Haven't really done too much umpiring since I came back, but was involved with the Mill Street project when it got going. My father, for better or for worse, was the town manager for a number of years here in Raymond, so I disclose that to people in case anyone has any concerns about that. So I've been slightly aware of what's been going on in the town, at least municipally, for quite a while now, even before I was really of age to be aware of such things. So I kind of had more of an interest in it than your average kid growing up in Raymond.
Great. So you know the process. We will recommend that you, your name out to the selectmen. The selectmen at their next meeting will choose to either appoint or not appoint. And then you have to sign some forms and take an oath and you're ready to
Absolutely.
go.
Fantastic.
Is there a motion?
I motion that we accept Ben Crowder's application and forward it to the selectmen for their consideration.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? All right, so that's the process. So you're
Excellent.
certainly welcome to stick
I
around.
plan to, absolutely.
And listen in on our parking discussion. Might not be the best thing to start out with, but. All right, proposed ordinance amendments, proposed site plan review standards, Article 10B is next up. Should be. Jim, do you want to start us off with a quick one?
In looking under the site plan review, currently we have staff review, minor review, and major review. And what we've witnessed and what we're hearing from the public, primarily those in commercial development, is, again, the process is drawn out for sometimes very small projects. Currently, projects that are between 500 and 2,400 square feet of addition are handled by staff review. Those greater than 2,400, is that right, Chris? Are minor up to 4,800, and then over 4,800 is full-blown major review by the planning board. Minor is also planning board, but the criteria is a little bit less. The real crux seemed to come with the additional altered impervious surface. Again, the same footprints were about the same for impervious surface as they were for building, and for somebody who may want to put down a few parking spaces, it seemed like a large burden for them to make the trip to the planning board and wait a month or two when it can easily be done by staff. Same criteria, it's just that we could move on that a lot quicker and save somebody a lot of aggravation. And that usually comes up near the end of the construction season when everybody's kind of short-sighted and realize it's coming to an end. And in some cases, you know, that we've pushed them past the point where they can do any work. And just as general, just to be business friendly in the community, it just seemed that we could uphold the same standards and move the process along without any harm. And of course, we always have the authority to bump that up to planning board if there is something there of conflict or something that we're concerned of greater than just the thresholds. So what we'd like to do is move the staff review to basically anything under 10,000 square feet impervious surface addition could be handled by staff review. Anything from 10,000 to 20,000 would be handled as minor review, and anything over 20,000 would be full-blown major site plan review. And then we also moved the threshold for minor review to under 4,800, which almost doubled that as well. Again, a lot of times those are relatively small building additions, and it doesn't seem feasible to put them through the ringer for all of the criteria. And again, we always have the ability to you know, look at that a little bit deeper if we decide to. So we're not locked in to.
I guess one of the comments I'd have in looking at this is that we have another application before us in the Shoreland zoning district for parking, and in thinking about that, I went online and did some research about parking lot sizes, the number of square feet or number of parking spaces that in different types of retail or business operations are applied to a building square footage. And one commonly used rule of thumb is for every 300 square feet of space that a business occupies, they need one on-site parking space. What my concern here is, Jim, is there's a little bit of a disconnect here. If we, under staff review, if we exceed the building size to 2,400 square feet, that would imply 8 additional parking spaces. And yet, if you go to a 10,000 square foot parking lot, allowing 275 to 300 square feet per space for a 9 by 18 or 10 by 20 with, you know, with backup, that's a 35 to 40 car parking lot. So there seems to be a disconnect between the additional size of the parking lot and the size of the building and the number of additional parking spots it implies, and that same comment would apply to the minor review criteria. Maybe you could comment on that for us.
Don't you have to subtract out the building? Because that's impervious?
No, well, that's implied as impervious as well.
So that's the question is it 10,000 additional impervious, or is it
Right.
7,600
Well,
for parking?
it doesn't necessarily
One's
mean.
building and the other is impervious,
But-
or you're including the building
Correct.
and the impervious.
Correct.
impervious.
Correct, right.
Okay, well then that would lower, if you go 2,400, now you have 7,600.
If that's the
and,
case
you know,
where you
that's
have-
in the neighborhood of 20, you know, 20 to 22, 23, something like that, which is still almost a 3-to-1 ratio over the additional parking spaces implied by the 2,400 square feet. I wonder if that's if they're too you know, wide apart.
And we really
there.
didn't, we really didn't use that. Again, we kind of used the threshold being, looking at it from a stormwater permit process, where most of the sites that we have in Raymond are going to water bodies most at risk, or ponds or lakes. And typically a lot of those are, the 20,000 square foot is the threshold where you'd need a stormwater permit. So we kind of worked backwards, saying, okay, those definitely have to go through major site plan because they incorporate a DEP permit. And then we just kind of looked back and said, well, we've had some applications come in, you know, 10,000 may be a little bit high. Again, what is a reasonable, you know, situation? And again, you know, we looked at building and then we just said, well, what's a reasonable square footage? And we just said, well, maybe half of the DEP threshold would be reasonable for staff to review. Again, if it's too complicated or if it incorporates traffic impacts, if it is all parking lot, In some cases, it may not even be all parking lot, it may just be a lay-down area or storage area or something like that.
Maybe they're trying to increase their parking for their existing facility. because
Correct.
it's
Exactly.
Exactly.
For instance,
Yeah.
Adequate as it
somebody
is.
wanted to pave a gravel surface, regrade it and pave it. They could do up to
Yeah.
10,000
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
coming to the board. But not necessarily creating anything new, just paving.
And no business owner in theory is going to want to build a 10,000 square foot parking lot when he only needs 4 additional spaces.
Right,
So that's
right.
self-governing in a way too.
And the other thing is that he said, the other word that kind of kicked us into that, good point, Chris, is altered. So if you have a gravel surface now and you wish to pave it, that's considered altered. You may not be creating any more impervious surface, but you may be altering it. So, I mean, you can play with that. Maybe you say additional, maybe you're only happy with 5,000 square feet, but you may be able to alter up to 10,000 square feet. We can look at it that way too.
Or a percentage? Or a percentage?
Well, then if you get into
Based upon-
small lots, the percentage
Yeah.
becomes burdensome on
Makes
the small commercial
Okay.
lot
Yep.
owner.
That makes that tough, yeah. You know, thinking about it, I guess if a business owner is not gonna wanna develop more than he really needs, just because of the costs and, you know, associated with the development, then that would be self-governing, and, I guess that kind of ameliorates my concern some, yeah.
Chris, maybe you could answer, and not just specifically on this, but kind of question. All of the, because we've moved a lot of things to staff review, well, not a lot of things, but a good number of things.
We've done
recently.
backlot driveways,
Yep,
some sign permits. This would add some additional work for
right,
staff.
for staff. But the, I guess, the actions that you guys take, the staff actions on these things, where does that ever, I mean, where, is that compiled someplace? Is it, I mean, we never see it again. Once it goes to staff, it never comes to the planning board for action any longer. Who kind of watches that stuff?
Well, it would be, we are basically the review authority. Chris would look at it, I would look at it, we would treat it as if it were same application form,
Yep,
come through, it still would be documented the same way, still would be on file at the town. Same standards that apply for minor site plan review would be used at staff review, unless there's
yeah,
particular.
no, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying,
But it's still,
I'm not-
it's still in a file, it's still at the town in the same format as if any other application comes in.
okay. I was just kind of wondering whether or not we should be, that we should be kind of looking as to what it actually is being done. You know, not so much, no longer involved in actually the decision process, but the following things we've kind of done. Otherwise, as we move this stuff into your guys' realm, we kind of would tend to start to lose continuity of what's actually happening. You know, we know what's happening now, because almost everything's coming to the planning board. But as we move it out of the planning board, we would start to kind of lose track, I think. I mean, I think I
the
would.
kind of things that we were foreseeing doing would be like a facade change on a building.
Right,
Over the 1,200 to 2,400.
Repaving gravel lot.
Repaving,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yep.
Things that wouldn't involve traffic patterns and, you know, if we saw something coming in with a different parking pattern or additional parking, I think we'd bump it up to the planning board.
Well,
and I would think you probably would too, but I'm just wondering if we're gonna make it into an ordinance, whether or not we need to kind of, you know, when you're gone and when we're gone, you know, that's still gonna be on the books.
well, it's still gonna be,
Well, I'm wondering,
Am I-
do we still have them record the site plan?
no, we don't have them recording now.
Yeah, Steve?
Would it work simply where, I don't know how much more work this is for, but if at every planning board meeting, if staff just gave a list of
Well, that's what I was wondering.
projects that have
When
gone
we do,
through
out
staff.
there.
well, I
did a
think what we
report.
could do is when we do the final, like we do findings of fact,
Mm-hmm,
when one is completed, we can add it to the next agenda as like a planner
action's taken, yep,
communications.
Yep.
That way you can have an ongoing list of what's been done, what we've reviewed, see the conditions, so that if it does,
And it'd be recorded
Trigger.
on the DVD.
yep,
and if it triggers anything going forward in the future,
That would be great.
you'll have a record of, personal record of what happened. So
Yep.
we could easily do
Is
that.
that-
There's also the condition that these figures are within a 2-year period. So if somebody did 2,400 one year,
Right.
within the next 5 years they did, you know, it's,
Right.
we'd keep
Right.
track of
It's a
it.
cumulative effect, so if they did 24 each year, then they'd be before you.
That would be great.
Quick question.
Yep.
Just, and this is gonna sound really nitpicky. The DEP permit, stormwater permit, does it specifically say, I have to look it up, is it over 20,000?
20,000 or more.
Okay, then
in
I
it.
think this needs to be 19,999.
You're right, yeah. If
Well,
we
it
want to
says
conform to
does-
DEP, yeah.
I mean, it's nitpicky, but someone could come in and go, okay, I can go
Absolutely.
under minor,
Yeah,
if I
valid point.
just shave it
1 foot.
1 foot.
Well, we really don't have jurisdiction over the DEP anyway.
Well, I mean, but we wouldn't be requiring a stormwater permit at 20,000
Well, we
square
don't,
feet.
we don't require it. It's the DEP that requires it. It's a separate entity to us. It's just that we
But
just.
it's one of our checkpoints on our major site plan review, which wouldn't,
Well, it depends. I mean, that's only if it's within a direct watershed. If it weren't in a direct watershed, it could go up to an acre. So, I mean, but we can say,
More than 10,000,
more
but
than
less
20.
than 20.
Yeah, right, less than
Okay,
20, I
less
would
than
say.
20,000,
Yeah,
that
less than
makes-
20,000 should be the way.
I have a question on, under the language, general language of both staff review and minor review. Is it currently written anywhere that, and if it's not, we should add language that if staff review or minor review finds something that you think is going to be a tar baby that really needs to be looked at by the planning board, that you're not obligated to complete the review, that you can pass it up to us because it does merit planning board consideration regardless of whether it's classified as a staff review or minor review item.
I remember language like that.
We have that in the backlot driveway ordinance, I'm not
Right.
sure if it's in.
Right here, under 4, under Article 10B4,
Yep.
the staff may require that any site plan application be reviewed by the planning board as a minor site plan review, even if the amount of area proposed to be developed or renovated is under the threshold that would trigger planning board review, if the staff review process is unable to adequately resolve all relevant issues raised by the site plan review
I
process.
thought there was something in there about that, yeah. And as long as that gives you the right to kick it upstairs, then that, I'm okay.
Yeah, and it's, as I mentioned, it's the same criteria that you have, just that we can expedite it a little quicker.
Anybody else? So our next step is to, Greg, I'm sorry, did you have something to say? Oh, next step is to prepare it for warrant? And, okay.
Do you need a motion for that?
Need a motion for that?
I don't think so, I think we need a motion once the warrant's done, right? Am I right, Danielle? Do we need a motion to prepare the warrant?
I think there is a motion to recommend for a
Warrant,
warrant.
okay.
I would move that we accept the language as presented and recommend it for the warrant.
As modified with the less than?
Correct, as
modified.
modified for the 20,000 square foot
Right.
statement.
It, that's why, once they do the warrant, then we'll do the public hearing.
You have to
and
do a
we send
public
it to the
hearing.
selectmen.
So next week you'll see them all in warrant form, you'll recommend them for public hearing, and then we have the public hearing, goes to selectmen, goes to the town meeting warrant. Yay.
Then it gets voted down anyway.
Be positive, be positive.
All right, so there was a motion, was there a second? Second. All right, any more discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? All right, done. Zoning map? This is, the zoning map is designed to get us in compliance with the state, is that correct?
Bob, what happened, we changed LLR 1 around streams to stream protection and be in line more with the state. So we went from LLR 1 to stream protection, which changed 600-foot setback for shoreline zoning to the 100-foot setback we have for stream protection. What got missed is Panther Run is not a stream. It's considered a river. And a river needs to be protected like a great pond, same as shoreline zoning. So this would attempt to, Mike Morse picked it up at the DEP, something they missed when they approved our land use map, but it got picked up recently, so this is a chance to
Correct.
correct it.
Okay.
Is the correction for 600-foot shoreline
It would be
zone?
a LLR one, which is 600 feet.
Why can't we make it 250?
It's not 260, that's 250, isn't it?
It's 250 for the state, but the town has had, for all of our shoreline zoning,
Well, there are other
600
shoreline
feet.
600.
I know better than you. I was affected by it.
We're actually, though, just returning to where we were with this, to the.
I know, it's an opportunity to make it less, make it 250 instead of 600.
Well, then you'd be doing that for all LLR ones around all lakes.
Okay, I've got a question. It's 600 feet from the high water mark?
Correct.
Correct.
Does this gray area, it looks like it's not really, if the high water mark is the green wandering stream, so to
It's-
speak.
That's not the
It's the
600.
yellow, it's the yellow that's kind of underneath the green.
I think the green wandering is existing, right?
That's
Okay,
wetlands
that's
associated
wetlands.
with the
Oh.
river.
Okay, well, as long as he is properly plotting 600 feet from the outer limits of the yellow, the length of the
The
river.
map portrays it the best that you can do digitally. In the field is where we measure the 600 feet.
Okay,
In,
all right.
in particular, like a 100-foot building setback, I do that, or we have surveyors do that.
I guess my point is, if, you could certainly make the case that some areas, it looks more like 300 feet, and others it looks like 600. It could be hand-drawn a little more accurately, just so somebody that comes in and looks at the map at the town office for guidance isn't wildly put off by several hundred feet, and make an application that makes no sense, because the field work isn't gonna
I
support
think
it.
it's offset.
See what I'm saying?
I don't know, I don't see where he's speaking to
Yeah,
it
I
being
don't know.
less.
Because you got, I'm pretty sure that that's offset digitally from those limits.
From the yellow line, right?
You're right, yeah, from the outside of that yellow line. It's just that you've got,
I
where you've
think
got
what you're
bends.
looking at is, you're looking at the green being the river, it's not the green, it's the
No,
yellow.
I know, the yellow, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So it's tough to, it is difficult to,
It just looks like some areas are not as, you could massage this a little bit, I
Yeah.
think.
And we can have John take a look at that.
I think what you've got is that you've got so many bends that you get arcs that overlap and make it.
It looked to me like you just did a cloud that just followed the river.
No, I think they're actually off from the bends in the run.
And then the arcs, and then this one's like that.
But our map always has a disclaimer on it that it's field measurements in the
Right.
field that determine the 600 feet.
We're not responsible. Okay.
Well, I think that's fair, though. for the
Oh, of
for
course
an
it is, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Steve?
It seems in this situation, we are, in many, many, many cases, basically subdividing owners' lots, and they're gonna have two zonings.
They do.
That's common.
Is it,
It's common for resource
You don't
protection.
usually go by lot lines to determine zoning.
with this change, does this have to go to public hearing?
Yes.
Yeah, public
Yeah,
hearing
sure.
and
Yeah.
and be
Okay, that
voted
makes
on at
that-
town meeting.
All right.
So if somebody wanted to do something that met the requirements of one of their zones, but not the other, they would ask for a waiver and have to go through.
Or they'd have to build on this little part up here and,
Yeah, yeah. You shouldn't have bought that piece of property.
Stupid ordinances.
Now. Be nice. All right.
Is this going to become a warrant article, or is this just an
It's gonna have to.
administrative change right now?
Has to.
It's a warrant article.
I move we accept the map as presented, and submit it for the warrant article.
Ready, Greg?
Yep. I'll be a lone vote.
All those in favor? All those in favor? And opposed? Done. Good So our growth management, Chris,
Yes. I spoke.
Get rid of it.
I spoke with Shauna.
How is it
She
work?
took a look at it. There were two options, either you massage the ordinance or you repeal it. She felt with, looking at it, that it should be repealed. It didn't do what it was intended to do. We have done other things according to the comprehensive plan to control growth as, in the comprehensive plan, it spoke to increasing lot sizes, which the planning board did a few years ago. And what she did say is that we should revisit this occasionally, and if growth gets out of hand, I should give you an annual report as to the number of permits in the area that were considered growth management areas, and if you wish to go back to some type of a growth management ordinance at a future date, we could look at that, but it's not necessary at this time. We're doing 6, 7, 8 homes in the growth management areas where, when this was thought to be a good idea, we were doing 60 to 70.
Right.
And now that it was based on a percentage down to 30% of the 10-year average, and now we're looking at 8 homes, which is, we've got 100 or so vacant lots in approved subdivisions. That could be a significant hardship on somebody.
If we expanded the amount of years that we use for the average?
It's a 10-year average, you just keep moving it down.
Oh, yeah, no, I know that, but what would happen if we expanded and made it a 15-year average, or 20-year average? Would it increase the numbers
I
sufficiently?
haven't done the math on that, Bob. I think it would change some, but not, if we keep going at this rate, eventually it would catch up with us again. Unless we saw a dramatic change in growth over the next couple of years. We went from such high numbers to such low
Yeah,
numbers
I-
so drastically.
But you can remember how difficult this was to do in the process. And, because, you're doing this at the height of the building.
Right. Right, the other information I can give you is that Shauna hasn't, the town attorney hasn't seen any issues with other towns with any growth management ordinances. Pretty much, if they have one, they've repealed them. I think we're one of the last towns standing with that type of an ordinance. So, I mean, you have the option of repealing it, or we could look at massaging it. Your instructions to me last time we met were, let's get rid of it.
Yeah,
I remember from that meeting, the difficulties that were presented by the paragraph 7 limit on building permits, that, as you say, now we have so few of them, if we limit to 30% of a 10-year average when we're only having 6 or 7 a year, then now you're down to 2. And I understand that, but I'm not sure that doing away with the entire Article 5, with the entire thing is a good idea. There's a lot of language in here that I think is advantageous to the town in controlling and organizing and managing and directing growth. Maybe thinking more about striking the limit on building permits language and leaving the rest of it intact, or severely modifying the limit on building permits language. I don't see a lot in the rest of the ordinance that just, to me, seems egregious or horribly thought out, that is wrong thinking.
I'm wondering how much of it is actually, doesn't appear in other places. It's not covered.
For instance, covered where?
Well, I mean, our open space has got, another in.
That would apply to, in subdivisions, that would be covered in a subdivision.
Yeah, I mean, if we just strike paragraph 7 and we leave everything else intact, I'm just wondering what we're really at, what we are saving from, that's not already covered in other areas of the ordinance.
Well, if that were the case, then this entire ordinance should have originally consisted of only the limit on
Yeah.
building permits.
Well, but then I guess you have to get the exceptions in, right? Isn't that what 4 is?
Yeah.
Just designed.
I'm not ready to strike the whole thing. I understand the argument about the permits. Maybe we need to think harder about things in this ordinance that are advantageous or good, and and not with striking. I haven't really read the whole thing through to say that this paragraph is good and this one is bad.
I think we should strike the whole thing. I never was in favor to begin with it anyway. I'll happily disagree with you, Bruce.
Okay.
That's why we got a
Question.
committee.
Chris, was there ever a year that we actually came up to any of these limits? Or did,
This is the closest year.
so, it was actually a
We've
little bit?
never exceeded it, but it dropped from, since I've been here and we had, it was, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but
It's right here,
we
70.
went from like the 30s, 20s to single numbers,
Right.
real quick.
See, I'm not,
So I'm
What-
wondering if you looked at the, where it tumbled was when you go down to 30% of the 10-year average.
right,
Maybe that language could be changed, to you look at the 10-year average, your 10-year average would be, right now, 25, 28 permits, but then you take 30% of that and you're at 8. That's where
Okay.
I was finding it not working, was when you did these multipliers by the percent. It went from 85% in 2008 down to 30% in 2012. That's what made this so dramatic of a change. So if you massage the percentages.
At the total land area of Raymond, as with the lots as currently sized, and if all the lots were split up into their smallest parcels, the maximum number of lots that could be theoretically built on in Raymond and the total population that would engender, and going from 4,500 residents to 10,000 residents or whatever, and you know, how far down the road over a 10-year, 20-year, 25-year period do we want to space that growth and then attack it from that kind of a standpoint? It would obviously take quite a bit of noodling to try to figure, you know,
Well, there's also the consideration that not every parcel is buildable.
exactly.
So you've got slopes,
Exactly.
you've got wooded, you've got cliffs, you've got, you know, there's
Right.
so much that would factor into that.
Right.
I'm thinking,
But that would still be a much more accurate reflection of where we could ultimately end up in 25 years than just saying, oh, 10 years.
well, I think this, like, I know you guys, I wasn't here when you guys did all this work. But I think from what I see, it was a good attempt. Where it failed, and it is this percentage piece. I think when you take the 10-year average, right now, that would be 25 or 26 permits for this year. Maybe you don't look at a percent, you just do the 10-year average. Then you're gonna automatically, it's gonna be a slow growth. Like if it's 25 this year, you can't do 50 next year,
How
because
long,
you've gotta take the 10-year average.
how long have we been tracking permits?
I
How far
think
back
they
do they go?
started 2002, we probably could even go further than that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly when we.
I was just wondering how many economic cycles we've gone through, because that obviously.
Oh, this is only one.
Yeah.
We've only one. We did this and everything crashed.
Okay.
So if you follow my theory though, if you didn't have this percent, that slowed it down from 70 to a reasonable rate. The economy did that.
Yeah,
The
and that's a good
ordinance-
idea, because
The
we,
ordinance didn't do it.
we chose 30% only because that was a reasonable number based
From-
upon,
Based on 70.
The
Right,
spike, the
right.
spike that you were getting at that time.
Right.
exactly. But now that,
You're
since
saying-
that cycle has dropped,
Now
yeah,
you've got a
So if you
truer,
look- if you're
you've got a
listening-
truer, sampling size to gauge the average.
Steve,
you know, that's my concern of throwing all this out is you're kind of open yourself, there is no safety breaker
I
on
have
it.
the same
and
concern, but
you
I,
jump up to 70 and we're back trying to recreate this
Right.
again.
Right.
Whereas something, I was thinking of just maybe a cap, but maybe if 10-year average works, some
well, I
way.
can't see why, I mean, I'd have to play with numbers a little bit
yep,
and talk with the town attorney on a 10-year average, but
But if you do a 10-year average, how is that number made available? You mean every year you're gonna go back and adjust that number?
right.
He's been doing that
That's
anyway.
what I do.
Well,
now.
no, I mean, well, you haven't because it was posted out till 2012.
right.
They gave you the percentages, but I guess, yeah, you have had a running percentage.
My recommendation would be do the 10-year average, visit it every 3 years. Just like you do now.
Right.
And in 3 years' time, if we start to see this thing creep out of control again, then you put more limitations on it, you go back to a percent.
Or do you go 10-year average with a cap? Just so, we-
Yeah, cap's tough.
It's a tough one.
all right.
Yeah.
Going back to that idea that I threw out a little bit earlier, if you accepted a posit that Raymond's population is now 5,000, and in 50 years, we don't want it to have more than double, you know, using the rules of 72, that's about a 1.4% population increase per year. And if the average residence has 3 people, and you're adding 5,000 more people, that's about 1,600 to 1,700 permits, which over 50 years is roughly 30 a year. So,
So that.
if you
so-
see, I'm kind of backing into the same area.
Yeah,
and
we're coming up with the same number, just a different way.
Yeah.
But this is all set up, if we just removed the percentage for now, leave everything else intact, and review it in 3 years. I mean, I think maybe that would be the way
That'd
to
be good.
start it.
Yeah,
I can talk it through with town attorney, Jim and I can look at it again, and come back at you again.
Let's do that. Only because
Because
Greg
I-
wants to get rid of it.
No, I kind of agree with Bruce, I don't think it's a great thing to just get rid of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the direction I got, and that's what the town attorney kind of went along with, so.
I mean, there are
But it's a good-
exemptions in
after this
here
discussion,
that-
I'm thinking
because-
maybe we go,
And you think about it, that does work fairly well, because even if the spike starts building and we start seeing sprawl again, that's still gonna be a cap, because you're gonna have to take the previous years, which are gonna mellow that,
Right.
that cap out.
So it's really the percent that was the,
And there are exemptions in here that we've had talked, you know,
and
amongst
they
ourselves.
can remain in there.
Right.
Somebody owns
Somebody would come
land
in
for
with an
10 years,
application
they're not.
with a real reason for why it should be approved, and,
Right.
and, yeah, and we built the exemptions in, we shouldn't just strike them.
Yeah, I agree.
all right. So this one will move just to, you'll just look at that number?
Yeah, and I'll come back with some real numbers and try to,
So we'll probably have a follow-up meeting next week, and we'll reconsider the language then.
you wanna do it next week at the planning board?
Could we do it? That would be really, I mean, it's gonna be really
I'll
quick.
try.
Yeah, and you
Well,
also
we've
got.
got-
I can probably,
I mean, this is like,
Shouldn't take very long.
It's going to be to a warrant, so it won't make it to
The next week was the cutoff, wasn't it?
If you look at just the regular language, you prepare it for a warrant, and then.
And it'd have to be posted today or tomorrow, so for the next December meeting, January meeting, it could be ready.
well, public hearing's in January, right?
Right.
So do we still have time if we talk about it next week?
If I can, I'll put it in warrant form and you just amend the warrant.
I don't know if we even really need it warrant form yet, do we?
Why don't we just eliminate it and then revisit it, bring it back again? And then I can make more noise.
But I mean, if we're just
And then
doing
we
it
can
as
put
a,
eliminating it on the warrant.
but if it's not a public, it's not a public hearing, it's just, it'd be kind of a workshop item again, right?
Right, well, as you can see, each one of these, they're voting them all to warrants, and then they approve the warrant next meeting to go to public hearing. So they have to see it, so we would have to have it, like, 2 meetings in January then, in order to leapfrog it to the public hearing. So we'd have to have the public hearing like at the end of the month.
Could you vote on it now to put it into warrant form?
Yeah, that's
With-
what I'm saying.
Right, just remove the percentage.
you
And
guys
then,
can
and
put
then
it on the numbers.
it's already language in there to revisit in 3 years.
mm-hmm,
So I don't see how it could spiral out of control in any way possible.
right, I mean, the only thing we're gonna be
Because in 3 years, you're gonna revisit it. 'Cause it's in the ordinance already.
yeah,
So I think you guys could vote right now
just to set it up
to
that
set
way.
it up as a warrant for the next meeting,
Would you talking about the next meeting in 1 week?
Yes,
in 1
Okay.
week. I don't think it's that hard to do.
yeah. That-
Yep.
Because all you're gonna do is strike the 7,
Item 7.
Item 7 and make it an average.
7, and then write something in 7 that says a 10-year annual average, rather than those decreasing
So it's a
percentages.
simple change to it, okay.
So I think we could do that, and have it ready for next meeting, and that way.
Now, is it gonna be a 10-year average from the date of the person's application, or January 1st
I
of
think it's
that
already
year
written in
going
there.
back,
I
or
think it would be
what?
January
I think we
1st.
need to define that.
That's in there already.
It's
January
over and over,
1st.
January 1st over again.
It's January 1st of the year. You-
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, yeah, okay, fine.
So moved.
All right, second?
Second.
All those in favor? What?
Better than nothing.
Merry Christmas.
I did that just to mess up your head. How am I doing?
He did a good job. All right, parking.
Oh.
Let's do the commercial first.
Okay. I believe
That'll
you
be the
also got,
easiest.
just so you're aware, there were some correspondence that has come in. I think most of these had to deal with the
Yeah, I think one of them,
shoreline zone, but there was
there
one.
was one.
From the Economic Development Task Force, which you may want to peruse. In particular, I think
thought
there's
that was-
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items that they had flagged of concern. One has to do with changing the setback from 20 feet to 10 feet is an improvement, but they want to go all the way to a 0 setback
On the side lot, correct?
on the front.
Front.
And then they had a question about why was the pavement setback different than the landscape setback, and again, I think they understand that, but it's, our thinking was that if you say you need a 20-foot pavement setback and you make it a 20-foot buffer, with winter plowing and operations, that first 5 feet of buffer gets destroyed by snowbanks, and the idea was to give a little bit of buffer for the buffer, basically. So that's why we came up with a little bit different, denomination on the buffer size than from the pavement setback, and it's about 5 feet. So we just kind of figured that first 5 feet could be lawn area or whatever, but it's not, it's gonna get damaged just because of car overhang and everything else. The other concern, and maybe you want to discuss further about the front yard setback. Again, we've got Raymond Design Guidelines, which clearly want that buffer from 302. You've got the comprehensive plan, which is talking about green spaces. We're trying to provide here a compromise that allows business some flexibility, but maintain the character of the village and the greenery, and everything that we like that we've done. It's just that in some retrofits, we've just made it very difficult for commercial to build out or convert or redevelop. And the idea was that if you wanted to go to the 0 setback, then it was a waiver, and there would be some compromise in there so that we would maintain some green space, whether that be a percentage of islands or we utilized actually the right-of-way, but they'd be responsible for maintaining it. We gave some options in there so that we just didn't give it carte blanche that we'd have everything paved right up to the right-of-way line. And I guess that would be my concern, is that that's what we would see. We'd lose a lot of that buffer if we allow the 0 setback. And I know that if I'm a commercial business owner, then I want that visibility right up to the right-of-way line, but there's got to be some compromise, because clearly the comp plan and your design guidelines, have called for this. It's good for environmental practices, it's good for screening, it's just good for appearances in general. There's a lot of positives to having some green space. So that was one concern. Another one was, again, talking about the waiver criteria, and the word unique was something that came up, concern about that definition. From my standpoint, we just put it in there so that not every time somebody comes in here, they can apply just because there's a feature there. It had to be something unique or different on the lot that restricted them from being able to do what the ordinance requests them to do. So that's why the word unique is there. If there's a different word, we're open for discussion. I'm sure you are as well. That was just common language that we see in the ordinance with other items.
Do you see unique covering a situation in that they cannot achieve the number of parking spaces they need in that space they have? If in fact without the waiver, I guess what I'm saying? Would
Yeah.
that be considered unique?
No, I mean, it would be a unique physical feature, a unique physical restriction. Whether-
Location of the building.
Location of the building because it existed
Its
prior to.
proximity to 302, for
Right.
instance.
Or it may be a land feature, maybe there's a, I don't know what would be there for a land feature that would really restrict it, but most of the time it's a building.
You know, when I read this, paragraph A, need to alter the parking standard due to unique features such as
Right.
existing physical property limitations due to geometric lot configurations. To me, that's a lawyerly way of saying lack of space.
Right.
It means
Yeah.
the same thing.
It is.
Sounds better, though.
It sounds good.
I don't think that we need to put in the term lack of space. I think it's implied just in the language.
And then we had also in presence of a dominant land or structural features, all in existence prior to the adoption of this ordinance revision. So, I mean, it's got to be something that's existing. It's just not something that you can create and then come back 2 years later and say, hey, it's in my way. And then again, I discussed the discrepancy of the buffer widths in the front yards and side yards between, and again, it is basically for a protection shoulder to the buffer. Then there was a question with regards to wording of planting landscape area buffers may be placed in lieu of natural vegetated buffers, but must be a minimum of species 3.5 feet tall for 50% of the buffer area within the front yard. Again, seems to be some concerns about can they prune the shrubs, maintain 3.5 feet, will they grow higher? We didn't really get into that kind of depth of discussion when we looked at this. I think originally we had 6 feet, and it was actually through some of the discussion here at the board that, again, we thought that the front yard, being that a business would want visibility, we'd want to, narrow that down to 3.5 feet. Again, so that we protect cars parking in the front yard, so you don't have headlights coming back out on the main thoroughfares, but enough so that they would still maintain good visibility of the business front building itself. Personally, if it's 3.5 feet, I mean, it's Chris's enforcement, but I would think that anybody could go out and maintain that at 3.5 feet if they wanted to. You're not going to throw a ticket on them for taking a full-foot shrub and cutting it down to 3.5. I don't know. I mean, how do you enforce something like that?
I don't know, it'd be pretty difficult.
I mean, I think we initially look at it as just from the standpoint of when we,
It was guidance more than.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we look at that as a design practice, when they put these in, we want to put species in there that we know are going to be low, and I have no objection to them maintaining that. I mean, if somebody goes out there and pulls them, that's another whole item, but, if they want to maintain them at 3.5 feet, I mean, it's their plant, it's their,
Yeah, and there's nothing that says they can't, right? I mean,
right, there's nothing in there that just says it has to be
right.
3.5 feet for
Yep.
50%, so I mean,
They don't have to plant the 3.5 footers right next to the driveway.
Right.
That was
right,
one, they can,
right. That's another reason that we kind of pushed things back a little
Right.
bit too.
These are the things that you can discuss
Right.
at the site plan review.
Right.
I was thinking the same thing, that every lot and every development is different, and how the lights are gonna impact oncoming traffic, or, the visuals of the building, they're all different things, and those will become apparent in site plan review, which may require changes to the landscape plan.
The one that probably, I think, is one that may take a little discussion is the islands are going to be a problem in existing parking lots. Under F in our proposal, all parking areas shall be designed to incorporate landscape island strips with no less than 100 square feet per island within the internal parking lot. Parking islands or internal green spaces must be 5% of the total parking lot impervious area. Again, I think, Sharon Dodson is concerned that because there's so limited space in the business corridor that everybody who comes up against it is going to ask for a waiver of this requirement. Personally, this is a percentage that is used in other communities in and around the Portland area. 100 square feet is really only half of a parking space. We're not talking a huge island, and I understand that a lot of people from a maintenance standpoint don't like islands because when they plow them, they're a pain in the neck, but At the same token, they do break up that expanse of openness of the parking lot and add some shade and if planted properly.
And it's what the design guidelines really.
And it's again what the design guidelines, and those are just guidelines, they're not requirements, but that is what the design guidelines were pushing for.
Yep.
And again, with the waiver criteria in there, they can come in here and try, but it's really up to you as a panel or a board to decide whether you want to start precedence by waiving those, you know, and should really, you know, hold those for unique and difficult situations. So, and again, you know, 5 years down the road, we may be looking to modify some of these things, you know, they're an ongoing, moving thing. And then the last question was with regards to what is the front yard, on 302, front yard setbacks are from the right-of-way. They wanted to know, Danielle, what is the MDOT right-of-way distance from the center line? They heard that it had increased in the past 20 years. I think it's, depends on what section you're in, for one, but I think it goes from 66 to 100,
It's
right?
100 feet through our commercial district.
So it'd be
it's
50
50
feet.
feet from
Right.
center line.
50 feet from center line. I mean, that's, there's
What was the issue with the speedy stop when we did that? With the-
I wasn't here for that.
You weren't here for that one?
But,
Was it the sign that was in the right of way?
I think, yeah, I think it was. I think it was the
Yeah.
sign was in the right of way, had to be moved back.
But that's what we've got, for instance, down at the Raymond Shopping Center. A lot of those parking spaces are actually in the right of way.
Right away, yep.
So,
And you would find that just go across the street. Same thing at the new donut shop. Just
Yeah.
go right up the strip.
and that's, you know, and that's, again, that's an issue that we're gonna run into as these get redeveloped, is that they're grandfathered for the use they have now, but once they come in here for
Any-
expansion,
Any change of use that's
You know.
substantial.
and that's where this whole.
That's why we're trying, that's why we're discussing.
So that's kind of, so that was just one correspondence that we had on the commercial aspect. Again, I will leave that to you if you want to pick out of that to further discuss, but
Does repaving also bring this into,
We can.
if they,
when doesn't it?
if they just go in and just do an overlay, it doesn't. If
Okay.
they come in and alter that pavement and change the drainage courses or change the grades or anything like
Okay.
that, Chris would have or we would have the authority to put that under, you know, again, it's one of those items that you kind of looked at earlier this evening.
And we do have a lot of gravel parking lots. So that's one of the reasons we were talking about 10,000 square feet of impervious being what it was. Because
Right.
we were trying to make it a little easier for businesses, that, for instance, that wanted to pave, that we could do a staff review.
So, going forward, if there's no further questions on that, or we can take them as they come through, what I've done is prepared this review and kind of gave you a little cheat sheet in the front here of what changes we made based on the discussions we had last time. And really, as far as Article 9 goes, there weren't a whole lot of revisions that we had on that. I think where we got into it was on the Article 10, getting into, again, the landscape height. I did alter that so that it was 3.5 feet in the front and kept 6 feet for the rear buffer. 6 feet for 50% of that rear yard area had to be 6 feet. Primarily, we thought that because most of the properties in the rear of the commercial zone or village zones are residential, so more buffer in the back. And then I also changed just the general layout of how you would read this, just so it's a little easier to read, because before it was kind of built into the paragraph, so here it's a little bit layered so that you can read it more easily. And I don't think there was a whole lot more we changed.
Well, Chris, what were the problems that you were experiencing from the business community and the commercial district parking?
Setbacks.
They were all setback
Because
issues?
right now, in the commercial district, under the actual setbacks in the zone itself, there's a provision that says it must be 20 feet from the right-of-way line. And one of the items we're doing is striking that out of that, and then really addressing it under standards.
Okay.
Because when it's in the zoning standards, there's nothing you as a board can do or waive.
They
That's
have to
got
go through the Board of
it's got to go through
Appeals.
Board of Appeals.
Okay.
And then again, give you some tools with looking at redevelopment. There's just some buildings, because they've been there prior to any of these ordinances being in place, that just make the parking configuration then nearly impossible to make, it work. So the idea was to give them some flexibility to meet the standards, and then give you some tools to still meet the design guideline principles and the comp plan principles, and meet halfway.
Steve?
Under D, 10D, it says, this parking lot's 25 spaces, the pavement setback may be reduced by 50% with a waiver. So there's no way that they can come in for a 0 setback waiver?
Ask that again, come in with 0%?
Well, this is saying, that, let's say I've got a parking lot with 25 spaces.
Yeah.
And it's the only waiver I can get is to reduce my setbacks by 50%.
No, if you keep reading, it rolls over to the next page. It's just the way it broke up. On the top of the next page, it does give the exemption to parking lots in the village residentials, and
Okay,
may have pavement setback reduced completely for the front yard with a waiver because in compensation
all
of
right, all right.
landscaping.
So there is a
So
way
it's
to
just
do
kind of the way it
Zero.
cut off. in the-
okay, so there is a way to,
Yep. But only for the village residential and commercial.
and this will go to public hearing as well, so.
Correct.
Does
And it will be on a
community-
this will be a separate warrant than from the shoreline zoning. Because I think this one, I'm not gonna say faces less objection, but seems to have,
So there's less changes. We're not really.
there's really less
Yeah,
changes,
we're not
yeah.
really changing
I
much.
mean, other than the islands and the buffers, there's less hostility, I guess I would say, because this one's pro-business and no one's against that. The other one deals with in residential and shoreline zoning where it's much more sensitive.
Do you want the couple typo issues?
Yes, if you have any,
10D, have each parking lot, and then each parking lot, you just strike one of those
Oh.
each parking lots.
one was supposed to be, yep.
And then on G, your dash is in the wrong place. It says no dash loading areas, top of the page.
Top of the page. Oop, yep.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, good catch.
It should be,
Right here.
the dash should be before the no.
Right.
Oh,
I have nothing else to do.
Oh, and then, well, it wasn't in this one, it's in the, I think we get into that when we get into the off-site. When we looked at the off-site criteria there, under, which is actually in the shoreline zoning, so I won't even, I'll hold that separately.
Okay. Did you do another one for shoreline zoning? Or
Yes,
you-
yeah,
it's in there.
Continued on.
it's continued on.
Is
Last
it?
couple, 3 pages.
I got it.
You need a motion?
Yes.
I move that we accept the commercial parking standard changes to be developed into a warrant.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Passed. All right.
Okay, now on to the next one, and I just first want to again disclose to the public and to the board members that this ordinance was done out of lessons learned, not out of any particular application, and is not in response one way or the other to any pending applications or future applications, but we just happened to notice that there's an absolute, I'd call it a void as far as standards when it comes to parking lots in shoreline zoning, and we're not here to discuss whether parking lots are allowed or not allowed. Currently, they're allowed under the ordinance, and that is not the charge that we've been given. We've been given the charge to how do we put standards in place for the shoreline zoning when we're looking at all the other parking standards. So that's what we're doing, and I understand that a lot of people have opinions and theories and data to support that they don't belong in shoreline zoning. That's a separate item for the board or for staff to look at. Currently, the charge is to look at what standards can we apply to parking in shoreline zoning. So I just want to distinguish that, because I know a lot of the feedback we're getting from Friends of Raymond Cape and from other abutters, and there was actually some very good comments in there. I just want to make sure that we segregate the two and they're not responsive to the Fry Island application in particular. It's not to that at all. And part of the reason you mentioned last time I thought was very good was that we need to look at all of the uses in the shoreline zoning in all instances, not just those on Raymond Cape, but all those around any of the ponds, the streams, and shoreland that we have in town, and try to be, flexible for all those other uses that may be impacted by this. And, in particular, I can think of campsites and campgrounds that, in particular, we want to be sensitive to. Marinas, etc. So, with that said,
Before you go, I think the other thing worth noting, for the community, is that any of these changes that we do to these warrants that go to the board will have no impact at all on the Fry Island application.
correct.
So that they are grandfathered under the old ordinance. These are things that we would like to go forward. And I would just kind of, in reiterating what Jim has said, I think we need to be careful, since we're right in the middle of another application dealing with parking. We need to be careful that we don't write changes to the shoreland zoning parking restrictions so that we remove it, in effect, we remove it as an authorized use for the district. If that certainly could be something we might want to do, but that's not what we're working on right now. And that would be kind of a separate issue that the town would have to vote on, if in fact they wanted to do that.
And just one other underlying factor that goes into, I know people are concerned about the number of spaces and the size of these parking lots, but one of the other underlying factors that we haven't really expressed or touched upon is that any lot in the shoreline zone is only allowed 15% impervious for that lot. So that is another limiting factor that we haven't even touched upon, because we haven't, it's not really part of the parking, it's just part of the shoreline zoning in general. So only 15% of the lot can be impervious. That includes buildings and the parking lot. So that's another limiting factor above and beyond these standards.
I want to ask a question here, and I'm kind of polling the board here. I understand what you're saying, Jim, Bob, I understand what you were saying. Some of the deficiencies in the shoreland zoning parking criteria have only come to light because of some recent applications.
That'd be fair.
And I have felt in reviewing the parking criteria and the language and what is allowable and what isn't, that, as Mr. Ewalt mentions in his letter, I think he's got some good points, and I'll just say which ones I agree with and then ask the board at what time in the future, how are we going to handle this further discussion, and when should we be scheduling further discussion to look at all the permitted uses and make sure that the language and the definitions all line up with the intent of the shoreland zoning, which is a more restrictive zone. I personally don't think that independent parking facilities should be allowed in the shoreland zone.
And they're not being,
Let me just finish here. That's my own personal feeling. I also feel that municipal use should be of and by and for the town of Raymond, with mutual aid being a necessary ameliorating factor. And I also think that parking facilities should be accessory to an allowed principal use. If we're not going to fold discussions of that into what we're doing here tonight, I would like to have a brief discussion of how are we going to look at the permitted uses, and when is a good time, upcoming do we need to discuss this in the next year, the next 3 months? You know, how far down the road are we going to have this discussion? Because it's necessary.
Are you talking about when we would have a discussion as to whether or not parking is going to be a permitted use in the shoreline zoning?
Well, yeah, I mean, whether it should be an accessory to a permitted principal use, whether you will or will not allow independent parking facilities.
Well,
What are we going to define as
Yep.
municipal within
Understand.
the shoreline zoning?
I don't see any reason why we can't have that discussion as part of modifying our parking regulations or ordinances. But I think that what I wanted to try to say, and what I think Jim was saying is that we don't want to make so many modifications based upon one single project that we are designing our parking guidelines in the shoreland zoning in response to this particular project, and everything gets designed around that project. I would say, Bruce, that 90%, since I've been on the board, 90% of the ordinances that we have modified have been modified because things have come to the board, and we've said, we really need an ordinance that deals with that, or we need an ordinance modifications that takes care of that. I mean, the boat ramp thing, I think, was like the first thing we were really very proactive on, in actually modifying something before it became an issue, even though it was an issue, many, many years ago. So I have no objection to rolling those discussions in at this point.
I don't think that if, assuming we accept Jim's language on the pods and the size and the 50% impervious area of the lot, necessarily redefining municipal to mean of and by for the town of Raymond with additional, mutual aid uses, or saying that no independent parking, or that parking should be subsidiary to an allowable principal use. I don't think that's really screening out much of anybody out there, because we're allowing, if those changes were made, they still have the option of building parking with the pods and, connecting spaces and doing
But I think if
doing
we're
what
going
they need
to
to fit their business.
if we're going to start changing or adding definitions, we'd have to look at what those would do to the other ordinances. That would be my only comment there.
I think what, maybe put words in your mouth, I think what Bruce is asking for would be a review of section 14
Correct.
of the shoreland uses, including this
The
table.
permitted uses? Yeah.
There's-
Right, so because I feel
Well,
it's,
because, it's
come
you're
up
right.
where
All
there
three of
are-
those suggestions flow right to that
Yep.
chart.
And I
Right, they
think
do.
that
They do.
is relevant, and I think also, Bruce, your comment about the definitions of municipal use are relevant as well, for that section, what is it, 14?
14.
Yeah, 14. I mean, I've looked at that as well, and there needs to be, I think, some update maybe to some of those definitions as well, for the uses, or at least some description, because they don't necessarily match up with other things, but they should be defined in that particular shoreline zoning. The uses should be defined, and if there is one that's missing, we should fill it in. For instance, municipal use, it's called out as a use, should be defined what that use implies.
And we can take that up. I mean, that could be our next topic. I mean, after we.
Not necessarily for this warrant.
Not for this warrant.
Right, yeah.
We never do that for this warrant, but we could take it up, with the goal of next
We could
next
give
cycle.
Jim directions, marching orders to take a look at that for
Yep.
a month or 60 days or something from now.
Right, as soon as we get through this warrant cycle, yeah.
Well, I'm
that's
happy
definitely-
with that.
I think it's a great idea.
Because I've looked at other ordinances in other towns. There's government use, there's municipal use, there's intergovernment use, all kinds of regional uses. There's all kinds of definitions, and no one town that I found actually had a defined municipal use. So I found that it was semi-government, semi-municipal, semi-government, all kinds of different definitions, but there was not one that I found that actually defined municipal. So maybe we'll set the stage for something new.
I would also like to request that not only look at 14, but I noticed when we go back to other uses in other zones, there is not consistency across, so that we use the same language in all of these tables of what is permitted use.
I think part of that is because the shoreline zoning comes down from the state as a design guideline to
Okay,
each
Right,
town.
and it's kind of a
And
cookie cutter.
it's a formatted design guideline, as a guide for towns to go by. And you can modify it to be more restrictive, but you can't be any less restrictive than what the state guidelines are. And anything that we write into the shoreline zoning ordinance needs to be approved by the state before we can adopt it.
Okay, maybe it's the other,
So,
ordinances with
I
uses,
think that's why you're
just
seeing
those
that you
consistencies.
see
Right.
the inconsistencies.
That's-
They were created by two different entities.
Right.
The town created the land use ordinance for our uses, and the shoreline zoning came down from the state, and then we tried to modify it to
But can we
fit
take the
Raymond.
shoreland and apply it to the land use if there's inconsistencies in definitions?
Well, yeah, and I think that's what probably should be done, we just cross-reference.
Right.
Here are the zoning land use definitions, here are the shoreline zoning definitions, and cross-reference and see which ones are out of whack with each other, and if we can, probably pull pull in and make them either, like, the shoreline zoning a little more restricted than the state model if it matches our zoning ordinance, or the other way around, and try to make them as consistent as possible. But what happens is we go through these, every 2 or 3 years, and we change one piece, it has tentacles, and it goes out and grabs onto other pieces, and we don't necessarily see them until somebody comes in with a unique application, and boom.
It's called planner job security.
Well, this one must have been done 20 years ago, because there's a lot of them that are old, so.
Oh, I know.
Okay, and before we get going, Kevin, would like to acknowledge and thank you for all of your inputs along the way. And we will, I'm sure we're gonna come back and we'll ask you, I know you sent the last email in, and I'm sure when we come up, if I forget to ask you, just gonna get my attention.
Sure,
Because,
that's why I'm sitting next to you here.
All right, perfect,
He's gonna take the next position on the planning board.
yeah.
I have to recuse myself.
With shoreland zoning, it's the section G, and as you've noted, it had the greatest impact for change. One thing we corrected was the setback for parking areas to 100 feet from the shoreline. Previously, we had 75, we've updated that to 100, and that's right in number 1 of G. 2, we reformatted, again, the setbacks for a little bit easier reading, so that it wasn't buried in the paragraph. That's for B, C, B and C, yes. And then we added the language, I think as per Steve, which had to do with the 50 passenger vehicle sizes are no more than 20,000 square feet pavement of impervious surfaces, which is under 1A, yes. And that was again, so that if we got into like the boat launch facilities, you could, we didn't want, and also I made it 50 passenger vehicles too, so again, keep those sizes
Yeah,
down.
that's only half an acre, you think about it like that.
Right. And then 1D, which was a request of the board, we eliminated porous concrete or infiltration note offsetting need for islands in the shoreline zoning, where you basically didn't want to give them credit for using those products and then have them reduce the islands. You felt that islands are actually more beneficial in the shoreline zone than they are in the commercial districts. So we struck that benefit away. I wordsmithed the infiltration purpose, which was another concern. I think that also came from Steve, I'm not sure. And that is on number 4. It will now read, off-street parking lots within shoreline zoning shall be designed and managed to prevent stormwater runoff from flowing directly into a water body, tributary stream, or wetlands. Design shall additionally incorporate measures which promote recharge of surface runoff by means of natural soil infiltration or by engineered best management practices as approved/allowed by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection in determining the appropriate stormwater management requirements for peak runoff rate, quantity, and runoff quality treatment for a proposed parking lot or facilities within shoreline zoning. The following shall apply. All projects subject to site plan review shall conform with minimal standards as outlined in Article 9, Section X, stormwater quality and phosphorus control. In addition to the minimal standards in Article 9, Section X, all parking lots within shoreline zoning shall provide treatment through practices involving buffers, infiltration measures by wet pond construction or engineered design in such a manner as to treat at least 50% of the impervious surface proposed by the development. So I don't know if that Does that work for you? Okay. And it wasn't just you, I know it was the rest of the board as well. And we clarified driveway for clarity where to measure from. I think that was Bruce's concern. It was from center line to center line of driveways. And we referenced state highway roads for requested MDOT approvals and pedestrian crossing. We added section F, which was requested. Section F had to deal with off-site parking lot, and it's a concern of the board, and it reads, if off-site, should be parking, doggone it. If off-site parking is proposed by an applicant, it is their burden to provide evidence that the property's lot parcel from which the off-site parking is being proposed has, 1, adequate parking to meet any primary or other approved use on that property lot parcel in addition to the spaces being provided by the applicant, and 2, proof of parking availability specific to the submitted application which is independent of all other leased or potential off-site parking users. So what you wanted to make sure was if somebody uses somebody else's lot, that lot is basically has enough space so that it doesn't interfere with the use on that lot already, and that it has not been basically double leased. Because somebody may have an off-site parking lot. I mean, it's a unique case. I don't think it's happened, but somebody could have a lot that says, I have 20 spaces, and they go to this person and say, I will lease you 15. Then they might go to the next owner and say, I'll lease you 10. Well, they only have 20, but they may be leasing 25 spaces. So it's just a protection to make sure that, you know, it's the burden of the applicant to make sure that his spaces are basically dedicated to him and him alone.
Does this paragraph F also, even though it doesn't specifically say it, there is language, I think, under Article 9, the parking standards, or somewhere else in shoreland zoning that says that the parking lot has to be properly sized for the intended use they're providing parking for.
Right.
Is that implied
That's
and
still
understood
implied.
to apply to F
Yeah,
here
it still
also?
applies to the parking lot in general.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And then I just want to apologize again, my editing here, number 6. I had stricken all the other additional language, but for some reason the strikeout still didn't go through a piece of this, and I think it was one of Mr. Ewald's concern, and that is 6 should read, no independent parking facility shall be allowed in the shoreline zone, period. It's that simple. I mean, there was a piece there, the offsite.
So, or off-street parking lot not associated, blah, blah,
Right.
blah, that's stricken.
That's stricken, and it was that simple. So I apologize to Kevin and to those that may have thought that I was trying to subvert that, but that was the intent.
You covered that in the 30th, it just didn't make it into this iteration. for
Right,
whatever
right,
reason.
right.
That's maybe either, I mean, before that last meeting. So.
Yeah, it just didn't, for some reason, the strike-through didn't come through this time, so, but that was the intent.
Should we add to that paragraph 6 that all parking facilities in shoreland zoning shall be subsidiary to the principal use of a permitted principal use?
How do you interpret that now?
I think it says it somewhere else.
How do we interpret independent parking facility?
That's defined in our, it's defined under Article, and we can reference that if it need be. It's
So if we're saying no independent parking facility is allowed, that actually says the same thing as saying that any allowed parking must be subsidiary to a permitted
Right.
use.
Right, because it's defined, it's defined, and maybe we should include that definition in the shoreline zoning, because again, we get that crossover, but it's in Article 9 that we've added in here, and it says,
Article 9?
Article 9 is general parking
right,
standards,
must
isn't it?
be-
9C3
well, that's what I was thinking, but maybe it's not.
doesn't really, it says it has to be within 200 feet.
Article 9 is
I'm thinking Article 9-7, all independent parking facilities shall be designed to procure or provide, no, that's not what I'm looking for.
Primary use of the law. Yeah, that is hard
I thought we had it
to
some.
A, independent parking station.
Article 9, paragraph C on pages 43 and following of 141 talk about off-street parking. I wonder if it's in here somewhere.
That's all right.
I know we defined it. Done so much of this thing. Planted
You're
park.
in land use, you're not in shoreline.
Yeah, but Article 9 is applicable to shoreland too. Shoreland just modifies it. I'm just wondering if the language is in here, because Jim mentioned Article 9.
I don't see it.
Not sure what happened to it. I know we defined it, maybe it just got left out of this draft. Let me look at the last. We did define it previously, I just don't know where it went. Oh, it's because we had it, I don't think we included it this time, but we had definitions of those three.
Oh, on a separate piece of paper?
It was on the previous, on the last discussion we had, it was, yeah, it was, we had defined, and, do you have the last?
Well, under shoreland zoning, under paragraph G, page 22 of 65, paragraph 2, parking area shall be adequately sized for proposed use. Is that what you were looking for?
No,
No, we want to know exactly what an independent
yeah, we had,
parking is. Exactly,
Oh,
exactly
oh,
where
oh,
we're
oh.
referencing here.
I know we had defined that before. Oh, it's under parking definitions here, I just got it. There was a separate piece to the last article, and I didn't include it this time, but there were 3 parking definitions from the last go-around, and we didn't alter any of those, but I'll just read, there's a definition that should be included with this warrant. There's off-street parking area, off-site parking area, and independent parking facility. An independent parking facility reads, an outdoor parking or storage area or enclosed garage or structure for storage of parking or of motor vehicles where it is the principal use on a lot or parcel, or is to be operated as a business for lease, rental, or by hourly rate for motor vehicle space. This shall also apply to areas such as tow yards or compounds not associated with a garage or vehicular repair facilities use. So I think that gets back to your...
Yeah. Where does that language come from in our?
It
our
doesn't,
manual?
we've
Oh, it
created
doesn't?
this.
Oh,
We've
that's the
created this.
creation,
Yeah,
okay.
and it was in the last article, but it's kind of floating out there, and it will go in both the...
And we
the
should include
definition.
that definition of independent
It
parking
will
in your
go-
paragraph
Yeah.
All 3 of them.
All 3 of them go into the definition
Okay.
standards under our general ordinance.
Okay.
So I apologize for not including that, because we didn't make any changes to it, but it should be included.
I'd like to bring up one
Okay.
other op.
Go ahead, see if I'm...
It's kind of an interesting, I hadn't thought of it, but this was brought up by John Ewald.
Yep.
And this is what I was thinking about more and more, this issue of not allowing parking to be across a road. And I'm thinking of places such as, let's say that the boat ramp down on Mill Street was developed. If you had, I mean, that's a really dangerous area. If you had a parking lot on the other side, people crossing, I'm wondering, is it something we want to consider? In shoreland zone, a lot of the roads are not necessarily straight shots and, it's a safety issue.
You talking about not allowing it at all?
Well,
Right.
that's what he's proposing. He's saying,
No.
yeah, he's
Is it?
saying no off-site parking shall be allowed on the opposite side of any public road, street, or way from the principal use property.
But would that preclude a deer hunter from parking across the street from his house so he can go into the woods in the middle of November?
No, it's parking facility.
Well, what,
So
what,
no
what-
parking
Well,
lot.
it says off-site parking.
Okay,
Off-site parking,
yeah.
I'm reading that as no parking lot.
Yeah.
Can be-
yeah.
can be
But that's-
cited.
That's where you get into the language problem.
Right.
The way that's written, that would preclude a deer hunter from
Right,
parking
I'm
across
not-
from
I
his
guess-
house.
I guess I'm taking
Yeah.
a different view of, is there a safety issue with allowing parking facilities to be located across the street from the principal use?
Well, especially in the.
We don't allow it on 302.
Right. Under the
About
shoreline.
Some of our campgrounds.
Yeah, we have a lot of
Yeah.
campgrounds with crisscross, but what we've put in there under G, number 5, which was specifically for off-site parking. Off-site parking lots shall be allowed in the shoreline zoning if they are within 300 feet of the principal or accessory use as measured from center line of principal use's entrance to the center line of the off-site parking lot driveway entrance. In determining the appropriateness of an off-site parking lot or facilities within the shoreline zoning, the following shall apply, and that's where we applied A through F. And one of those is safe pedestrian connectivity is provided between the principal or accessory use lot and the off-site parking lot. This means that sidewalks, delineated paths, or trails are provided for pedestrians meeting ADA standards. And then C, that design has adequate traffic control devices to allow for safe pedestrian crossing of roads, streets, ways that are either public or private where off-site parking is provided on the opposite side of the street from the principal or accessory use.
And I agree with that. I think that this language would be too restrictive, and I think the way you've structured that makes sense. Yeah.
And that would be but that would still be that would be a planning board issue on the safety issue, that if there was, let's say they did try to do something down on Mill Street, we'd go, it's just,
Right, I mean, you've gotta look at, again, what devices could you put in there, and you still have to deal with the site plan criteria, which, and the shoreline zone criteria, which is where we are with,
right,
You know.
okay.
Site distance and all the rest of it,
correct,
yeah.
yep. Okay. So that, so that pretty much wraps up what changes we had made, and obviously, like I mentioned, you've got, there's some members from the public here who have written, we've got, again, concerns, and I don't want to mention a particular application, but concerns that we may be benefiting a particular application, and
we're having no impact on that.
right, correct. And then both Mr. Ewald has brought up a few interesting points, and again, one of them is municipal use, which gets in more to the definitions within table under the shoreline zoning uses. And then maybe even, when we get to that point, Bruce, maybe even parking facilities may be something we want to define in shoreline zoning. I think we've kind of covered that now with our definitions here, but maybe we should make sure that those definitions get into the shoreline zoning as well, and maybe the table can be modified to address some of these,
You know,
more
looking at
specifics.
subsidiary usage and this kind of thing, yeah.
And then he mentioned off-site parking, and we've already deleted, there's no independent parking facilities allowed in the shoreline zoning, that's already been edited. But Mr. Fay's here, maybe he wants to speak in person to his concerns.
Actually, we were just talking to Warren, so.
But, yeah, I mean,
Well, one second, what, just, you were talking earlier about how the size was limited.
yep,
Where is that?
that is in G. Chris, you found it before, right off the bat. It's in G1A.
That's the 20,000 square feet.
Yep.
Yeah.
The maximum, in determining the appropriate size for parking facilities in the shoreline zone, the following shall apply. The maximum number of parking spaces or parking lot area allowed in any one cluster of parking is 50 passenger equivalent vehicle spaces or paved or impervious area not to exceed 20,000 square feet.
But don't we also have a limitation on how much of an area we can actually have impervious?
15%, 15%, and that's a zone standard,
That's a zone standard, right?
right?
And that's 15%,
15% of the total lot area.
okay.
So if somebody had, you know, let's say, 100 acres, you know, they could impervious 15 acres. Or if you had 10 acres, 1.5 acres could be impervious.
Okay,
Which could mean that you could have essentially, if you had nothing else on the property, which is not likely, you could have up to 3 of these type of pods parking.
3-pod parking.
Because these are
on
about
a-
half, these are a little under half, a real half acre.
A pod is roughly about a half an acre?
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry, Kevin.
all right. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yep.
Yep,
It was Kevin Fay, Spillow Road, Wild Acres as well, Spiderweb Way. No, it was timely because you were talking about 15G in the paragraph 5, I think specifically, in the ordinances, which I had actually brought up in one of the pieces of correspondence. There were some things that changed in the current iteration versus some of the past language that I just wanted to ask a couple of questions on and get some clarification on. The way the current language reads, and you had just articulated, is off-site parking lots shall be allowed in the shoreline zone if they're within 300 feet of a principal or accessory use. That has changed a little bit since the original wording. The inclusion of accessory is new, and I guess my first question is, it's always been my understanding that parking itself was, by definition, almost accessory. So now offering parking as accessory to principal or an accessory use, I'm confused as to how something that is accessory can be accessory to something that's accessory. You know,
We were confused when we saw, I think it was your planner brought that up too, so we were kind of confused by that. I guess if a lot had 2 uses on it, and say you had a marina, and then you had a boat repair facility within the marina, both of those could have a parking requirement.
so which would be the subordinate use there, or the subsidiary use?
How would you?
I wouldn't use those two.
Just shows how it can be a little murky, and that's maybe the source of my confusion.
Or you could have a store and a campground, right?
Yes, which we do have.
Okay, so which one is the primary and which one is the accessory? I assume that the campground would be the primary and the store would be the accessory.
The store would be accessory too. Like Kokatosi, they have a general store.
So,
You can have 2 uses on a site. I don't know how you define which one is the principal use. It may be the one that has the most use. I'm not,
well, we could change that so that, you could even change it, if you didn't like the word accessory, you could change to multiple users or multiple uses on the lot. If that's the terminology that we're getting, hung up on.
Right.
But it does happen, in the
Right.
shoreline zone that we end up with a lot that could have 2 uses on it.
That point was more just an issue of confusion for me. The other
maybe
thing
you
was,
eliminate principal and accessory. Just have it 300 feet within 300
Allowed
feet
uses.
of the allowed use. Or
Yeah,
uses.
yeah, because it's accessory to that, it could be used, yep.
You don't need to use principal and accessory.
yep, that
Board,
makes,
your board comfortable with that?
yep, well, that's good.
Kevin,
Well,
does that make more
yeah,
sense
that,
to you?
that covers the first point. That was more of a,
Which one, now where are we with that, just so I'm clear?
it is, are you thinking about my document or just,
I got a question on I want to back up.
sure.
Okay.
Okay, on the section 14,
Land use table?
the land use table for shoreland, okay, parking is an acceptable use. So is that a primary use?
It could be principal use.
That could be so parking alone could be a principal use, but we're saying no independent parking facility.
Yeah, to me, if parking is the principal use, that's that's by definition an independent parking facility, because it's not supported by anything that it's subsidiary to. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe this goes back to the need to review this.
Well, if the warrant is not going to allow independent parking in the shoreland zone, then we're working right back around and saying that it must be subsidiary to the principal use.
But it's in conflict with this table.
Where is that?
Well, but the chart only says that parking is allowed, right?
Right.
It's an allowable use, but that would be a primary use.
It doesn't tell you.
Right. But if we're gonna modify that in the warrant by saying no independent parking, that automatically changes the definition of parking in the chart to a subsidiary use.
I think you got a conflict.
Argue the conflict. I mean, if you were an applicant, how would you turn that to your advantage if no independent parking is
Because
allowed?
parking is allowed under the shoreline zoning as a principal use.
But wouldn't a principal use be an independent parking facility? Because it's only there to be a parking facility, which makes it
I
an
would say,
independent
yeah,
use.
but
Which gets back to your comment again, Bruce, is that it says parking facilities, but then when we look at the actual standards for the use, it says parking areas. They're different words. I'm just saying that, and they have different connotations.
Yeah.
So,
Parking
I mean,
facility-
I don't know when we're gonna get
Well,
the,
the table refers to allowed activities. If you read the first sentence
Correct.
in section 14,
Right.
it says all land use activities in table 1 shall conform to the applicable land use standards of section 15. So parking is an activity.
Right, but I think we were using, I was hearing that we were using this, almost like using this table as, these are the principal uses, and therefore parking can be,
well, I think that's a discussion we had at one of the planning board meetings, but I think our attorney and one of the board members may have had a different, of opinion on that.
no, but I guess I'm saying, I'm worried there's a conflict between what we're proposing as this warrant and,
I wonder if instead of saying parking facility in the chart, it should just say parking.
Right.
And you remove the word facility. I mean, the word facility, and somebody could go out there and build a 6-story concrete parking garage. You know, if it was subsidiary to their campground or whatever, you know, if they could prove that.
Which I think gets into more of the, I don't want to say hostility, but the more of the confusion around what is allowed in the, what type of parking is allowed in the shoreline zoning. It really comes down to the definition. It seems to be the definition and the use itself.
Do you think if we struck the word facility and just had the word parking in the chart and then didn't allow independent parking, that would flow automatically to a subsidiary usage by implication?
Well, I think if you're gonna try to use this table as the allowed uses and start molding it that way, because it sounds like that's a charge we're gonna get to do next, we may want to match up parking, what we have for standards with the chart, which would be, instead of parking facilities, we say parking areas. Because that's the way G is written under the shoreline zoning, parking areas.
And then it would go to the definition.
And then it would go to the definitions. And then you could have, because you've got off-street parking area defined, off-site parking area defined, then you'd have independent parking facility, which wouldn't be allowed in the shoreline zone because that's a facility, not an area.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much of a conflict, because we are now gonna enter 3 different definitions for parking. And two of those uses of parking we're going to allow.
I'm just concerned that for a year, because this will go to town meeting next year, we won't be able to deal with this in time. There'll be a year where,
No, what I'm saying is, but we're saying that parking is an allowable activity in the shoreline zone, right?
parking facilities.
Facilities. And here we're gonna say no independent parking facility.
Right.
As a specific type of parking facility. But we also have 2 other parking, right,
Okay.
Definitions.
definitions
all right.
that we're
All
gonna
right,
So I
be
think you're
accepting.
clarifying it.
All right.
Right,
Shouldn't
there.
be confusing at all.
But I think,
Yeah, so I don't think-
you've made a great point, all of you, that at some point we've got to get back to this table.
Right.
Because this is where, when people go to shoreline zoning, they don't go through all the particulars, they go to this table first. And if this thing is confusing, then the rest of it is going to be even
Right.
more muddled.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. No. Just want to circle back a little bit to 15G, paragraph 5, which is what we were talking about earlier, about the off-site parking with the 300-foot limit and so forth. I'm clear now on the accessory use
Yep.
and principal use and so forth. One thing that did confuse me and was a little worrisome is that in the original language, I guess you could call it the existing ordinance, the present language had the qualification that parking with this 300 foot limit being in place had to be located in an adjacent parcel and was okay as long as it was in that 300-foot limit. In the current modification, the term adjacent was removed. And that was also some concern to me. Because it was like when I was working through this language with some folks on this, we thought it was a good idea that it's like when you get back to the whole principle idea behind like, adjacent language and.
Yeah. And the only reason that we struck that was, again, because we have current uses now that have parking on the other side of the road, and that would not meet the definition of adjacent.
I think currently it's okay. I don't think as a matter of policy, it's a good idea going forward. It just seems as though it sets up, and I know we're not supposed to talk about like the existing application, but I think one of the linchpins of that is it sets up a really dangerous situation. And I think not having it be adjacent and therefore on the same side of the road, not having that be a qualification any longer, opens up opportunities for further across the road parking. And I know you had good ideas about, crosswalks and safety and things like that, but it just seems like, to me, again, not being an expert in this, it just didn't seem to make a lot of sense to me as a good policy to, open up the opportunity for cross-road parking.
Well, just the only challenge we face the board is not trying to restrict legitimate usages where cross-street parking is really dictated by the predicates of the subject property that's being used. They just can't accommodate the parking they need to support their business.
Right.
And so they have to go across the road, in which case then they're subject to site plan review and all the criteria for safety and pedestrian passage. And we have to struggle with that versus trying to properly guide and direct and plan for, reasonable growth and reasonable use. But
Sure.
I understand your concern, but I don't think that it would be advantageous for us to strike cross-street parking. Maybe we need to go back to the land use ordinance itself and look at how the term accessory is applied, as you are mentioning in your
Right.
paragraph, and maybe massage that a little bit.
And I think there's enough in this verbiage, Kevin, to give the planning board the opportunity to decide whether or not it's a safe situation, that the parking or not safe situation. So to deny it outright, wherein a perfectly good and safe use could be done, that would be, way too far in one direction. As long as it's there, as long as we have the opportunity to determine whether or not it's safe or not, and true, sometimes it's a subjective call, but, I think it's better
Sure.
that it's in there.
Well, I know the safe and healthful conditions, I think is the Turner phrase, and I know that's certainly one of the criteria. The other thing is more sort of the questions being sort of taken care of. The other thing is more of, I guess, a suggestion for your consideration as a board. There was some discussion, I think, at the October 30 workshop about sort of, size of potting, which I think is a really great idea, actually, the idea of breaking things up into smaller parcels, with the landscaping and sort of the connecting and keeping as many trees as you can, particularly given our rural nature. And it looked like that was maybe heading into a direction where I'm headed, which is you've capped sort of the size of pods, which I guess is at a certain square footage or number of spaces and so forth. Is it plausible to, when you think about residential zones, rural zones, things that are in the zone, is it plausible to actually cap the total volume of parking at such a level that it's not going to have a tremendously negative impact on neighborhoods? Because even if it's broken
Yeah.
up into pods, which again is a great idea that I do agree with, something more than 50 spaces doesn't seem to be, first of all, residential, and anything, beyond that would seem to be harmful and pretty intrusive. So I was
Well-
wondering if the board would actually entertain the idea of thinking about sort of a cap on total volume of parking in a residential area.
Jim may have a thought about that. My initial thought there is that that's somewhat constricted just by the lot size. If somebody has a 10-acre lot, they can only develop
1.5 acres of.
1.5 acres of parking, which is roughly 60,000 square feet. And only half of that, 30,000 square feet, can be the impervious area of the parking itself.
Right.
Correct? I'm
This is the
stating that correctly?
15%, Mr. Sanford?
Well, if you had an acre, if you had 10-acre lot and you had 15%, that's 1.5 acres. Like you said, that's about 60,000 square feet of
Could that be-
impervious
of-
surface,
Which is 3
Okay.
pods.
which would be
Yeah.
3 pods.
Yeah.
Which would be, if it depends on how you configured those. It could be it would be no more than 150,
170,
spaces.
something like that.
150 spaces, which I know that seems like a lot, but if you look at some of the lots, Raymond doesn't have a lot of these large type of lots, but you can tuck 150. I bet you that some of the beach parking lots have more substantial parking than you realize. Some of the gravel lots hold a lot of cars, like if you go down to Tasseltop, that has the capacity to hold a lot of cars. And you don't realize it because it's so tucked in and protected, but I don't know what the number would be, but I guarantee you you'd fit 100 in there.
I don't know.
Yeah. But
So somebody has to have the gross size lot that they
Right.
want to develop as parking to begin with, and if you break that down into a 5-acre or
Yeah.
2 or 3 acre, you're going to be
But
really
you're probably not going to
restricting
be at
that.
150 because by the time you get done with your driveway in, that gets counted against you. You're probably going to be in the neighborhood of, I guess, 100 to 120 cars on 15 acres max. That's
I
not-
agree, Kevin, with what you're trying to say, but I think the other problem with this is that we run the risk of infringing upon the other adjacent lots. You can have you could have a parking lot of a smaller parking lot,
Right.
but, so then on a particular lot size, what about the lot that's right next to it? Or can't they develop there as parking area? And what about the lot that's behind it? Can't they develop that as a parking area? And before you know it, you've got this really huge parking area, but we haven't done anything of stopping a really large parking area. We've just got now 3 lots developed instead of one large lot developed. So I think there's always gonna be a way that if you want to build a really built parking lot, there's no real way in the ordinance to design that out. Because there would be a way around it to make it happen, operating within the ordinance. But I do agree with you that hopefully we will not have huge parking lots in Raymond, but I don't think we have that area of land that's gonna get kinda developed that way. And a larger lot, if we have a
If somebody
really
did have a
large
really
lot,
large lot, though, hypothetically,
hypothetically, we had a really large lot, it actually would work out better, because with the 50%, that parking lot could be tucked in and you probably would never see it from the road.
As you stand now, you've got an application that has 43 parking spaces, and it is close to its 3-acre threshold, just because of the way it's positioned. So, you can't really apply the potting to match up with the impervious area. It's going to be less than the impervious area.
Because of the connectors.
The connections and where it's located in the lot configuration all plays into that. But
out of the total.
I think the 15%, and I'm not sure how the state came up with that, because that's kind of out of the state mandate, but I think it was their method to cap basically just development on shoreline zoning and the impact of impervious surface. So I think we just tried to match that threshold.
Okay,
Did you have anything?
anything else?
No, is that, going back to this 15%, it's like if someone had
That includes buildings, it includes gravel surfaces, it includes
connectors,
connector
access
roads.
roads.
Anything that's on that property that consists of any impervious material, whether it be building, sidewalk, gravel, they consider gravel impervious surface, pavement, concrete,
So if someone had hypothetically 25, 30 acres or something like that, is that what Mr. O'Neill was talking about? It's just like spreading it out over the entirety of that thing would be sort of not intrusive? Or would they not even be able to do, an applicant like that would not be able to do anything really much beyond a couple of these pods? I guess I'm struggling with the
Yeah,
with the
again,
arithmetic at this point.
I understand, it depends on the configuration of the land, you know, and,
Because 15% of 25 acres is like between 3 and 4 acres
Correct.
of paved surface,
paved surface.
which seems a lot to me.
Right. It does, but then, like I said, if you look at what you have just before the town now, they're getting close to that 3-acre threshold already.
With the 43?
Yep. Because of the access roads and everything else they're putting on it.
The other thing that I think to consider, you go back to the stormwater issue. We're requiring that they actually
Right.
treat 50% of the stormwater that's coming off that. So if you have a 20-acre parcel, you're going to, from a design perspective, you're going to want to spread these out.
Right.
Because that's going to make it a whole lot easier to deal with your stormwater.
Yep.
Than if you then putting them all together. You put them all together, you're going to have, it's going to be difficult to deal with the stormwater versus.
Which was really one of the biggest deficiencies that I saw in the parking standards for the shoreline zoning, was the lack of stormwater management standards. And we really ran into that, you know, again, with very unclear language. But now, you know, we were saying to them, regardless of what the DEP says or anybody else says, 50% of your impervious area must be treated. You can't get away with just using your phosphorus credits to meet the standard.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, appreciate it.
And we'll make those suggested revisions to the,
Yes. Greg, you okay?
I move that we accept these changes to shoreline zoning, parking ordinances with modification with the inclusion of the definitions.
definitions.
Any other
For
changes?
paragraph 6.
For paragraph 6, right. Be sent for warrant.
I'll second that.
Any more discussion?
I think we ought to limit it to 250 feet.
Okay, any more discussion? All those in favor? Greg, all those opposed? All right. So is the plan to get all of those warrants to us by next week? Is that what the goal is?
Do that.
Yeah, all right.
Under planner communications, since you've now brought it up this evening, what do you want to do with that? When do you want to handle that table, or when do we want to?
Oh, well, I think we should get through our warrant process first. And then we have the public hearing first, and then right after the public hearing, we send the warrants to the selectmen, we can start in on the table.
On the table? Is that still possible they could get on for the next vote? Or is it too late?
For which
For the
next
table,
vote?
for the table,
For this vote coming up?
yeah, for the one
Oh,
in June.
Yeah, no, we won't make that one.
All right,
No. It's too late.
should be on next year's.
Yeah. But I think I think that as soon as we start getting into that table, it's going to lead us, like you said, the technicals is going to lead us into lots of areas.
Right.
And it would be better to fix it, you know,
While
one
we're-
big package than to fix it.
Well, I think it'd be better to strike while we're fresh in our minds what we want to do with that.
Right.
Because if we let it sit for 6 months, we're gonna kind of get hazy about why did we bring this up
Yeah.
before and what happened.
I think we'll be reminded of it.
So we only need one more motion.
Vote to adjourn?
Second. All those in favor? 250 feet?